Hello guys, it's WazzaTZK and today we're going to be ranking every Killing Floor 2 map from worst to best in a tier list. I'm afraid this is the most up-to-date tier list I can find. It only really went up to 2021, so I had to add some maps right here. As you can see, these don't have any names unlike the other ones. That's because I had to find an image for them and download them. And I'm going to be judging these maps based on its replayability, the space that it provides for training, and just how fun the map is overall. Those are the three areas I'm mainly going to be basing these maps off. So without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off with Airship, and you see, I'd have to give it a B tier. I've never really been a big fan of Airship. It's always been a little bit too cramped, a little bit too claustrophobic. It does have some fun features, like such as the ability to get stuck in the boiler room. That is quite a fun, unique feature, although it is kind of annoying. And the only real issue is with Airship, there's just not very much space, so I don't really see myself playing it very often. Coming up next is Ashwood Asylum, and I would give this an S tier. It's got loads of indoor and outdoor space, meaning that if you end up getting like the Patriarch, or if you end up getting the Abomination, then you can go indoors or outdoors, and it's got loads of space to run around. I found myself replaying this map a lot just because of how convenient the space is on the map. Coming up next we have Biolapse, and I would give it a B tier. It is a good map, but the only real issue with it is the lack of space. You do kind of find yourself getting stuck in some areas. There's not the most space to work with. I don't really find myself playing Biolapse very much because of the space. And I don't know, I just don't really find this map fun, to be honest. Coming up next is Biotics Lab, which is like basically an identical copy of Biolapse. Nothing's really changed. Biotics Labs are still pretty crowded. You're going to find yourself getting stuck everywhere. I don't really find myself playing it that much because it's not really that fun, to be honest. Because, like I said before, there's not very much space to work with. But the map does look quite nice. It has quite a lot of RGB, like a lot of futuristic stuff in it, so it does look like an appealing map, but at the same time it's not very good for like hell on earth because you're going to get stuck everywhere. Coming up next is Black Forest, and I'm going to give it a D tier. I'm not a really big fan of Black Forest. The map looks really dull and boring. The map's really small, claustrophobic. I end up finding myself getting stuck on trees or rocks when I try and move backwards. It's just not fun. I end up getting stuck everywhere. And the area security missions on Black Forest are absolute hell. You have to sit inside of a small house trying to defend an area. It's just not fun for me. So Black Forest, it does get a D tier, but it isn't the worst map in the world. It's just very claustrophobic, very dull, boring. Coming up next is Burning Paris, and I would give it an S tier. Burning Paris is definitely one of the most iconic Killing Floor 2 maps. It was one of the original maps which launched with the game. It has lots of space, has quite an interesting atmosphere, although it is a little bit dark, so you do kind of have to use your flashlight at times. It is still quite a good map, although you can't really see Zeds in the dark very well, as most of the map is dark, so you do have to use your flashlight. But overall, I actually quite enjoy this map. I always tend to play this map on endless mode to get the XP. Coming up next is Catacombs, and I absolutely hate this map. This is one of those maps which I just avoid playing at all costs. It's literally the worst Killing Floor 2 map in the entire game. Claustrophobic, boring, dull, nothing fun or interesting. I absolutely hate this map. On hell on earth, it's absolute hell. You get stuck on everything. There's very little space to move around. I just absolutely hate Catacombs. I just wish it wasn't even a map. Coming up next is Containment Station, and I want to give it a D tier, but I feel like it's a bit better than Black Forest because you don't get stuck on trees or anything. Containment Station does have slightly more space, but at the same time, it's quite a small claustrophobic map. The corridors are very small, you can get stuck on them easily. Although it is sort of an interesting setting for the map. It's just absolute hell to navigate because the corridors are really small, like I said. So as much as I really like Containment Station, I'm going to have to give it a C tier. Coming up next is Dystopia 2029, and honestly, I would actually give it an S tier. It's got a perfect amount of space, perfect amount of cover. If you end up getting the Patriarch or like the Matriarch, you can easily get to cover behind stuff. Or if you've got the Abomination, then you can easily run around the map. It's perfect for any boss. It's got loads of space to move around. It has actually quite an interesting atmosphere set in like a cyberpunk city kind of thing. Sort of reminds me of Killing Floor 3, like how the setting is going to be like a cyberpunk theme. Although we don't even know what Killing Floor 3 is going to look like. It does sort of look like a futuristic Killing Floor 3 map. There are a few tight corridors inside the hotel, but most of the map is very open, very easy to navigate. Coming up next is Elysium, and this is definitely one of my favourite Killing Floor 2 maps. Elysium has a lot of space. It's a massive arena which you can use to just run away from Zeds. However, the only real issue with Elysium is not very much cover. If you end up getting like the Patriarch or the Matriarch, then you kind of struggle for cover because you kind of have to like run around the tree. Whereas if you get like the King Flesh Pound, you can easily destroy him in this map. Not to mention you also get teleported to other areas, which is pretty cool. I quite like the different areas you get teleported to. Although some of them can be annoying, like the medieval castle and the forest. They're still pretty fun, although they could probably be a little bit better. They look a bit bland and a little bit dull, but apart from that, overall, I would give Elysium an S tier. Next up on the list is Evacuation Point. I would give it an A tier. It does have quite a lot of space. There's plenty of areas to move around. Although most of the map is very small, claustrophobic. Most of the time you're going to be running through small corridors or like small areas which you can easily get stuck on. Not to mention it is kind of difficult to see because the map is set in the dark. But it's not really that annoying because you can still sort of see properly. Coming up next is Farmhouse, and as much as I would like to put this in S tier, I have to give it an A. I do like Farmhouse, but the only real issue is the map is just far too dark. It's very difficult to see Zeds at times, although it does have a lot of space. Most of the map is just an open area, like an open field, so you can basically just run around Zeds a lot. The map is really spacious, although it's very tiny. You don't really have much space. It does still have a massive yard which you can move around in. The only real issue is, like I said before, Farmhouse is very dark. You can't really see. And when you have to secure areas inside the farmhouse, it can get pretty annoying because the corridors are very small, they're very claustrophobic. So as long as you're not in the farmhouse, you are going to have a good time. But again, it is very dark, so you can't really see what you're doing. Coming up next is Hellmark Station. Hellmark Station is quite a nice looking map. It is very interesting. But the only real issue is when you go through like the train tunnel stations, that can get a little bit cramped. And also securing areas, like trying to stay in the cafe area, that can get annoying because Zeds can easily surround you. You don't have much space. So as good as Hellmark Station is, it can get pretty cramped in some areas. Coming up next is Hostile Grounds, and again I would have to give it the same tier as Hellmark Station. Hostile Grounds, it suffers from the same issues as Hellmark Station. It is quite an open area, but most of the map is very cramped, such as the train station tunnels. The underground area of Hostile Grounds is very cramped, very annoying. You're going to find yourself getting stuck. Whereas above ground has some space, but again, you can find yourself getting stuck easily. Not to mention the map is set in the dark, so you can't really see where you're going or what you're doing. So as much as I like this map, it does suffer from quite a few issues in my opinion. Coming up next is Infernal Realm, and I would have to give Infernal Realm a C tier. I feel like it is a lot smaller than the other two maps, Hostile Grounds and Hellmark Station. I feel like there's less space to move around in Infernal Realm. You're going to find yourself getting stuck. Although there is a lot more light than the other two maps, I would say it's about the same, if not a little bit worse in terms of space. There's not really very much of it. Coming up next, we have Krampus Lair. Again, I'm going to have to give that a B tier. You are going to find yourself getting stuck everywhere. There's very little space to really move around. Although this map does have quite a lot of lighting, you're not really going to struggle seeing Zeds in the dark. And you got to give this map credit for being like one of the first Christmas map updates which we got in Killing Floor 2. It does look quite nice, still quite replayable to this day. The music in the map is also unique. It's got its own unique soundtrack. The Zeds even have their own seasonal skins. So as bad as the map is with space, it does have its own unique soundtrack, its own unique feel to the map. Coming up next is Lockdown, and I'm going to have to give that an F tier. I absolutely hate Lockdown. Lockdown suffers from the same issues as Catacombs. It's very small, very cramped. Although you can see better in Lockdown than you can in Catacombs because there is actual light, you're still going to get stuck on absolutely everything. There's literally no space to train at all. Unless you're a demo with a kaboom stick, you're kind of going to be struggling a lot trying to get around Zeds. It's just not very fun, to be honest. Coming up next is Monster Ball. I would give Monster Ball an A tier. Although Monster Ball, it doesn't have the most space in the world, it is definitely a very unique map. It's got its own unique soundtrack. It's even got fun features such as traps which players can activate to kill Zeds. You can even see hands in the map. Overall, the map looks really good both aesthetically and physically. Coming up next, we have Nightmare. Nightmare for me, it's a B and a C, but most of the maps in Nightmare is a C. And I say most of the maps because Nightmare is made up of multiple segments of maps. They're sort of stuck together, sort of. Just like Elysium, you get teleported to different areas in Nightmare. Some of them having loads of space, some of them being extremely claustrophobic, like Catacombs. And most of the maps are pretty claustrophobic in Nightmare. They also look very bland, very boring, in my opinion. You do get the very few maps that actually have some space, but that's quite rare because most of the maps are just absolutely claustrophobic. Coming up next is Nuked, and I would definitely give that an S tier. Nuked has the perfect amount of space for both kinds of playstyles. Whether you just want to sit in a corner and just shoot Zeds, or if you want to run around and shoot them, Nuked supports both of these kinds of playstyles. Not to mention, Nuked also has a lot of space on the map. It's also perfect for any kind of boss. Whether you're trying to fight the Patriarch, you can just go indoors, or if you're trying to fight King Fleshpound, you can go outside. Nuked has a lot of space which supports both bosses, any kind of boss. You can literally see nukes going off in the background. The atmosphere on the map is pretty damn cool. Although the nukes can sort of be annoying because they can shake your screen, it does look pretty cool. Coming up next is Outpost, and I think quite a few people like Outpost, but to be fair, Outpost is just not my kind of map. It's just far too claustrophobic. Most of the map is indoors, which means you end up going to get stuck on everybody. Zeds are going to surround you really easily. Although the northern lights on the map are nice to look at, there's not really much else in terms of map atmosphere. Nothing really too interesting to look at. It does look a little bit bland, and Zeds can easily get on top of you, easily surround you. It's just not very fun. Speaking of being claustrophobic, next up we have Power Core, which again suffers from this exact same issue. Just like Lockdown, it is very claustrophobic, has basically no space to train. It's basically just a copy and paste of Lockdown, if you ask me. It's literally got the exact same issues as Lockdown. I don't know why Tripwire thought copy and pasting Lockdown and calling it Power Core would be a good idea, but they just did it anyway. So coming up next is Prison, and I would give this a B tier. Prison has a lot of space, but it can also get quite claustrophobic if you stay indoors. Although it doesn't have the most space, it is still quite a big map, which means you can run around bosses quite easily. And the only real issue is with Prison, it can be quite dark, which means you do have to use your flashlight. Sometimes you don't even see any Zeds in front of you. It's also a really good map for camping. You can just camp in the watchtower. If you end up getting surrounded, you can easily jump off, just run away. Prison supports both camping and training, whatever you feel like. Coming up next is Sanitarium, and I would give this a C tier. For me, Sanitarium, it just feels boring to me. I don't really find myself playing this map very much, but it does have quite an interesting atmosphere, and the map is pretty spacious, has quite a lot of obstacles in its way, and also has plenty of space to move around bosses, whilst also having plenty of cover for specific bosses. Although the only issue is it can be quite a dark map, which means you can't really see where you're going at times. Also kind of claustrophobic, but not really. But apart from that, I don't really see myself playing Sanitarium very much. It's been one of those maps which I've sort of just not played really. Not that I don't like it, I just have other maps which I just like. Coming up next is Santa's Workshop, and I would give that a B tier. Just like Krampus Lair, it can get a little bit cramped, can get a little bit claustrophobic, but the map atmosphere is pretty fun, pretty unique. I quite enjoy playing Santa's Workshop on objective mode. It's pretty fun having to defend a sleigh from Zeds. Although objective mode can be quite repetitive, I find it quite fun on Santa's Workshop. It just offers a unique atmosphere and playstyle which I just don't find in any other Killing Floor 2 map. I enjoy Santa's Workshop a lot more on objective mode. It does have like an even balance of space and claustrophobic areas on the map, so it isn't too easy, it isn't too difficult when you have the right perks and skills. Coming up next is Shopping Spree, and I would give this an A tier. Shopping Spree does have quite a lot of space, but it can also get quite claustrophobic. Corridors can be quite small to navigate, but the map does offer plenty of space. Although it's not the most interesting map I've ever seen, it does look a little bit bland. It still is quite a fun map. I definitely don't mind coming back to this map every so often, just for a casual game of Killing Floor 2. Coming up next is Spillway, and I would actually give this an S tier. Spillway for me has an even amount of free space and also has an even amount of claustrophobic space. Although the map doesn't really feel that claustrophobic, I feel like the corridors are a lot wider, which means you can easily get around Zeds. That's what I really like about Spillway, whereas the other maps, they just feel really small, really tight. You can barely get around anyone. Spillway also has lots of light. You're not going to find yourself having to use your flashlight 24/7 just to see where you're going. It is quite a fun map and definitely is one of my favourite maps. I do tend to go back to this from time to time. Coming up next is Steam Fortress. I would give this an A tier. Steam Fortress does have quite a unique atmosphere. In the objective mode, you get to launch a rocket into space. Although you don't actually get to control it, you just do objectives to fuel it and stuff. It is still quite fun, quite a unique map, although the only issue is there's not very much space on Steam Fortress, but there is still enough to the point where you can somewhat escape from Zeds. But overall, the objective mode on Steam Fortress is very fun, and in survival mode it's even a fun map as well, even very fun on endless mode. Coming up next is The Descent, and I have to give this a C tier. It suffers from the same issues as Power Core and Lockdown, and the fact that it has very little space. You're going to find yourself getting stuck everywhere. The map atmosphere isn't the most interesting thing I've seen, but the map is still quite fun. It does sort of feel like Hans's Lair kind of thing, although the map can be quite dark at times. You can barely see where you're going. Some rooms have more space than others, which is kind of annoying. Some rooms you are going to kind of struggle with, but other rooms you're going to go through with a breeze. Coming up next is Tragic Kingdom. I would give that a B tier. It's not one of the worst maps in the game. It does have loads of space, loads of areas to move around. There's also unique things to do in the map, such as the circus area where you can burn Zeds. And there's even a couple of traps there as well, which you can use to trap Zeds and kill them. However, the only issue is with Tragic Kingdom is there's not very much light on the map. You do kind of have to use your flashlight a lot. But apart from that, it's quite a decent map. Coming up next is Volta Manor, and to be fair, I don't really find myself playing this map very much. The map is very dark, meaning you have to use your flashlight a lot. I find it very claustrophobic as well. There's not very much areas to move around in the map. Corridors feel really small. You find yourself getting stuck on Zeds quite a lot. I don't really like this map too much. I much prefer other maps, which means I very rarely even play Volta Manor. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to give it a D tier, but If I play this map a lot more, I probably would like it, but due to the lack of gameplay I have on this, I don't really find myself playing it that often. Coming up next is Moon Base, and I would actually give this an A tier. It does have a lot of space on the map, not to mention there's no gravity as well, which means you can easily jump over Zeds. Plenty of areas to move around. The map is very bright, which means you don't really need a flashlight to see what you're doing. It's better than Killing Floor 1's Moon map, in my opinion. There's just more space, easier maneuverability. Coming up next is Neverhold, and I don't really like Neverhold very much. It's one of those maps which I just absolutely despise. The lack of space on this map is absolutely annoying. I always find myself getting stuck on Zeds. That's just so annoying. The corridors are very small. Although the map is quite bright and you can actually see what you're doing. There are somewhat areas to train in, but not very much. So I mean, I would honestly put it in D tier actually. It's not the worst map I've seen, but it is a very small map. It is very annoying at times. You find yourself getting stuck on everything. Speaking of Neverhold, Carrion Helmet suffers from the exact same issues. This map is very small, very narrow. You're going to find yourself getting stuck everywhere. You have very little areas to secure in this map. It just makes it so annoying. Although I do sort of like this map more due to the fact there's actual lights, so you can actually see where you're going. Carrion Helmet still is quite an annoying map, and I don't really find myself playing this map much. I normally avoid it, just like Neverhold. Coming up next is Rig. I'm going to give it an A tier. I actually quite like Rig. It has quite a good amount of space on the map. Plenty of training areas, meaning you can just camp in a corner if you want to. If you end up getting surrounded, you can easily jump off and escape. Although the only real issue is the map is quite dark, you can't really see where you're going. Some areas such as corridors can be quite small, can be quite hard to get around. But overall, I actually really like Rig. It's definitely one of my favourite maps so far. Coming up next is Barnwich Town, and again, I have to give it a D tier. I just don't like Barnwich Town. The map's too small, too claustrophobic. You cannot see where you're going without a flashlight. You're going to find yourself getting stuck on Zeds a lot. It's just a massive pain in the ass. I absolutely hate Barnwich Town. Coming up next is Crash, and again, this is another A tier map. You got loads of space to move around. Some areas of the map can also be quite claustrophobic, such as the corridors. You're going to find yourself getting stuck. But the map does support any kind of boss. Whether you got the Matriarch, where you can just go inside, or if you got the Abomination, then you can just run around the map. The map supports any kind of boss, really, unlike Neverhold, where you're going to find yourself getting stuck on like the Abomination, because you can't outrun him because the map's that small. Next up on the list is Subduction, and I'm gonna have to give this a D tier. I'm not really the biggest fan of Subduction. I played it once or twice when it came out on the seasonal update, and that's it. I absolutely hate this map. It's just too small, too claustrophobic. Although you do get quite a lot of light, so you can see where you're going. It's just far too small. You find yourself getting stuck everywhere. It's just not fun. And finally, last but not least, we have Castle Volta, the newest map in Killing Floor 2. And I would honestly give it an A tier. I actually quite like Castle Volta. It has a lot of space. You can easily move around. There's plenty of camping areas on the map, meaning you can just sit in a corner. And you can even easily escape as well if you end up getting trapped. For example, the broken stairway, which takes you to the starting area. And I quite like the arena as well at the end, where you have to fight hands. I find that pretty cool. And although some people probably won't like this map because it's pretty bland, I don't really mind it that much. But anyway, I'm going to end the video here. That is basically all of the Killing Floor 2 maps in a tier list. If you want to create one for yourself, I'll leave a link to the exact same tier list. Although you might have to add things like Neverhold on, because that probably won't be included. I had to do that myself, like I said at the start of the video. If you want to see more, check out the Discord, where I'll be posting uploads weekly. And of course, I will see you all next time.